Picture this. It's October 1907, 2 o'clock in the morning in New York City, and there's this bitter, freezing wind howling through the streets. Outside the city's biggest banks, you've got thousands of terrified people lining up in the cold, desperately clutching their passbooks. Panic has completely taken over. The U.S. economy is literally on the absolute brink of total collapse, and the government, well, they're completely powerless. So, President Theodore Roosevelt has to make a desperate phone call to the one single man who can actually save the country. And who does he call? A sick, 70-year-old man sitting in his locked private library, just calmly playing a game of solitaire. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to decode the chilling, brilliant, and honestly ruthless playbook of that man, J.P. Morgan.
You know, to truly understand this story, we have to start with this massive paradox. Think about the era he lived in, right? Thomas Edison gave us the modern light bulb. Nikola Tesla gave us alternating current. Henry Ford built the automobile. These guys literally built the modern world with their own bare hands and their brilliant minds. So what exactly did J.P. Morgan invent? Absolutely nothing. Not a single thing. And yet, he somehow controlled all of them. Okay, let's dive into this. How does someone who doesn't build a single factory from scratch, who doesn't hold even one patent, become the absolute master over the most brilliant makers of the world? We're going to explore his playbook, rule by rule, to see how understanding the hidden mechanics of power allows one man to completely rule over those who create.
Section 1. The Master of Nothing. His ultimate playbook.
To really grasp how he controlled everything, we have to look at the dual nature of his actions. Let's go back to that infamous night in 1907. While thousands of people were out panicking in the streets, terrified of losing their entire life savings, Morgan was locked away in his magnificent private library. He was actually suffering from a severe cold, coughing, his nose red and swollen from a painful skin disease called rosacea. Yet, despite all of that, he was completely calm. He just sat there, playing solitaire, mathematically calculating the survival of the United States while the world literally burned outside his window. He knew the president's call was coming.
And that brings us to this defining quote. Morgan famously said, "A man always has two reasons for doing anything, a good reason and the real reason." When he bailed out the banks that night, the good reason, the one that sounded great in the morning papers, was patriotism. He was the hero saving America. But the real reason? Well, if the U.S. economy collapsed, his own massive investments and monopolies would sink right along with it. He saved the country to save himself. Section 2. Forging a Stone Heart. The Making of Morgan. But how does a person become this incredibly calculated? How does a mind become so totally devoid of panic? For that, we have to look at the intense genetic clash inside his DNA. On one side, you had his grandfather, John Pierpont. He was this fiery, intense preacher who knew exactly how to hack a crowd's emotions using nothing but words and sheer presence. Then, on the other side was his father, Junius Morgan, a deeply calculated, cold London banker who viewed any emotion as a profound weakness. Young J.P. Morgan basically absorbed both, the commanding, intimidating presence of his grandfather, completely masked by the cold, emotionless logic of his father. But genetics only tell half the story, right? Trauma tells the rest. At age 15, Morgan suffered a really severe illness. His father's bizarre idea of a cure, exiling him all alone to the remote Azores Islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean for an entire year just to toughen him up. So he learned early on that when you're weak, you get abandoned. Years later, he finally found some happiness. He married his true love, Amelia, whom he called Mimi. But tragedy struck again. Just 4 months after their wedding, she died of tuberculosis right in his arms. So the crucial point here is how he reacted to this tragedy. He didn't shed a single public tear. Not one. Instead, he locked himself in a room for 2 solid years, doing absolutely nothing but studying accounting and balance sheets. This brilliantly aligns with psychologist Carl Jung's theory of the shadow. When someone experiences profound trauma and isolation, it can birth a dark, hidden part of their psyche. Because unexpressed emotions don't just vanish, they fester. For Morgan, that unimaginable grief completely transformed into this stone-cold, insatiable ambition. He realized he couldn't control death, so he decided, he would just control absolutely everything else. Section 3. Profiting from the Panic. Capitalizing on Chaos. Morgan learned to ruthlessly capitalize on desperation, and his ultimate testing ground for this was the American Civil War. While the nation tore itself apart and poor men were out bleeding on the battlefields, Morgan utilized a legal loophole.
He simply paid a $300 fee to hire a substitute to take his place in the draft. So he stayed home in New York, completely safe, and turned his full attention to war profiteering.
Just look at the staggering math of what became known as the Hall Carbine affair. Morgan bought 5,000 defective, condemned rifles from the government for $3.50 each. He spent a mere 75 cents on some minor repairs and then turned right around and sold those exact same rifles back to a desperate military for $22 apiece. That is a 600% profit margin. The horrific part of this? These rifles were so defective they were literally blowing off the thumbs of the soldiers who fired them. But when he was investigated, Morgan was completely unbothered by it all. To the average person, it was treason. To Morgan, it was simply supply and demand. He completely compartmentalized human suffering from business logic.
Section 4. The meter and the monopoly. Crushing competition.
Let's move to and see how this builds into his ultimate strategy, an era defined by Morganization. At the time, the railroad industry was a total mess. You had multiple companies running trains on the exact same routes, slashing prices to the point where everyone was going bankrupt. So Morgan swooped in. His 4-step process was brutally effective. Step 1, find these bleeding, desperate competitors. Step 2, offer them a buyout they absolutely couldn't refuse. Step 3, fire their incompetent owners and install himself on the board. Step 4, merge them all to establish a total monopoly where he dictated the prices. Basically, he brought order through absolute dominance.
And if they didn't want to merge, well, consider the Corsair Pact. 2 rival railroad executives were fighting a vicious price war. So Morgan invited them onto his massive private yacht, the Corsair. Once they were aboard, he had the captain sail out to the middle of the ocean and just stop. Morgan sat there, puffing a cigar, and simply told them the yacht would not return to shore until they signed an agreement to stop competing and give him control. With literally nowhere to run, they quietly signed. It was basically a bloodless psychological kidnapping. This mindset dictated absolutely everything he touched. When the brilliant inventor Nikola Tesla came to Morgan seeking funding for a revolutionary tower that would provide free, wireless electricity to the entire world, Morgan stopped him dead in his tracks with one devastating question. Where do I put the meter? You see, Morgan had funded Edison's wired bulbs because you can track wires and you can meter them. If energy is free and just flying through the air, it can't be metered. So he immediately cut Tesla's funding, effectively ending the inventor's career. Morgan didn't care about utopian inventions, he cared about control. Section 5. Buying the United States. A private bailout. Eventually, Morgan's control transcended traditional business altogether. In 1895, the U.S. Treasury was hemorrhaging gold. They were down to their last $9 million, quite literally hours away from national bankruptcy. Now, President Grover Cleveland stubbornly refused private help, but Morgan didn't care. He took a train to Washington, sat on a couch outside the Oval Office, and outright refused to leave. When news broke that a massive draft was about to cash out the remaining treasury, Morgan calmly told the president that the country would be bankrupt by 3 p.m. Trapped, the president finally caved. Morgan orchestrated a massive gold bond syndicate to rescue the treasury. The entire deal to save the United States of America was finalized by Morgan in just 22 minutes.
And he wielded that exact same terrifying efficiency in business, too. In 1901, he decided to consolidate the steel industry. He asked Andrew Carnegie, who was the richest man in the world at the time, to just write down his price on a slip of paper. Carnegie wrote down a staggering, unheard-of sum, $80 million. Morgan looked at the piece of paper and instantly said, done. Not a single second of bargaining. That one acquisition created U.S. Steel, which became the world's very first billion-dollar company.
Section 6. The price of power. Owning the economy. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next, because having that much power over a nation comes with some intense scrutiny. Just how much of the world did J.P. Morgan truly own? Well, in 1912, the government's Pujo Committee uncovered a terrifying reality. Morgan didn't just own a few successful businesses, he single-handedly controlled 112 major corporations. His influence directed a $22 billion economy. To put that in perspective for you, Morgan effectively controlled 2/3, 66.6% of the entire United States gross domestic product. A private citizen was vastly more powerful than the state itself. It's mind-boggling. Yet when Morgan finally passed away in a hotel room in Rome in 1913, the reading of his will actually shocked the world. Despite controlling the entire nation's infrastructure, his actual liquid net worth was evaluated at roughly $80 million. When billionaire oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller heard this number, he was completely astounded. He famously remarked, "And to think he wasn't even a rich man." See, Rockefeller's wealth sat in bank vaults as cash. But Morgan didn't hoard liquid cash. His true wealth was completely unquantifiable. It was the absolute unquestioned power he held over the minds of 341 corporate directors who moved entire global industries with just a single nod of his head. Money is something you can count. Power is something you can only feel. Among the incredible artifacts found in his personal collection after his death was a pocket watch that once belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte. Morgan didn't just collect companies, you see. He collected power over time itself. Morgan's playbook is a chilling reminder for us today. The ultimate currency isn't really money, it's leverage over others. He had built an empire of complete control, but he could never quite control that void inside himself. Which leaves us with one final haunting question. Is ruling the entire world truly worth it if it means you are forever trapped on your own island?